Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 8th episode of The Greats of History, the podcast where we get to know people with the epithet of the Great and try to get past that honorific and understand who they were, what they did, and why some people seem to like them so much. I am grateful that you're here. We are at the point where I need to ask you a favor. If you're enjoying this series, can you help me spread the word a bit? Tell a friend, post to a social media page, send an email. Anything at all is deeply appreciated. It's quite hard to capture people's imagination and attention. Word of mouth is the best and most authentic way to do so. I sure would appreciate it. Thank you so much. Last time, we got to know Nebuchadnezzar the Great, the king of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, who accomplished the destruction of the dreaded Neo-Assyrians and built quite possibly the greatest city in all of human history. Today, we're going to meet not only a great of history, but also one of the great civilizations of human history, the Persians. Part of what has made our treatments of Thutmose III, Ramses II, and Nebuchadnezzar II so long was that there was a lot of backstory needed to contextualize them. For the first time in this series, we are discussing contemporaries. The death of Sargon and the accession of Thutmose were separated by 800 years. To get from Thutmose to Ramses, we needed to close the gap between their lives of about a century and a half. No such gap for this episode, as Nebuchadnezzar and Cyrus overlapped, and by almost 40 years. Cyrus would have grown up in awe of the power and glory of Babylon and its great king. And yet, there's something decidedly distinct about Persia in general, and Cyrus in particular. So, while we will stay in roughly the same area, at least at first, and be in roughly the same time period, we still need to lay some foundational context. This episode, which I hope you find interesting, sets the stage not only for Cyrus, but the next two people we will meet, Darius and Alexander. They're each titans, but to know what made them great, or considered to be great, we need to know about the Persians. So far in this series, we've met an Egyptian who conquered Mesopotamia, or a Mesopotamian who invaded Egypt, or other similar combinations. We've been hanging out in the same place, so to speak, for a long time. And the whole, people think X was great because he conquered and forged a huge empire, that narrative can get a bit repetitive. With Cyrus, we're going to start mixing things up a bit. The people we're meeting today come from a slightly different place and with a different cultural and linguistic backstory. And as mentioned last week, we're going to start getting a glimpse of the personality of our subjects, which makes this a different shade of a similar color from what we've been discussing so far. Cyrus and the Persians start to add a bit of a different tilt to things. For the first time, we start to look a little further east, or at least east of Mesopotamia. It's a big world out there, and thanks to Cyrus and the Persians, this series will start to see a bit more of it. Following this episode, we'll get to Greece, Rome, India, and China, just to name a few. We'll start the rest of our world tour soon. Very soon. One last note before we really get rolling. As I mentioned, this series enters onto the stage the Persians, one of the great civilizations, not only in Near Eastern history, but all of human history. But what did it mean to be Persian? The name Persian has complex origins, and if you're into the history of these people, you'll notice that I use the term a bit loosely. In a very strict sense, the term Persian refers to one of among many closely related tribes. To be a Persian thus meant to have originated from this one specific tribe. However, the term Persian also can refer to all these closely related tribes in aggregate. It can also refer to the empire that they forged, and over which they ruled for so long, and with so much glory, and also to the general region from which these people originated. Just like Rome could mean the city or the empire of which it was the capital, Persia can mean a tribe, constellation of tribes, a region, or a whole kingdom. In time, once our subject for this episode gets rolling, all the tribes would be united, more or less, so the issue becomes kind of moot. The point is, the term is a bit fluid, and in the interest of keeping the story moving, I'll sort of run past some of the technicalities. Then again, none of these technicalities would have mattered at all if it wasn't for our great of this episode, as he was the one that made us sit up and take notice of the Persians. By the way, whatever it means to be Persian, it becomes even more complicated further down the road when successor dynasties take over in a few centuries, namely the Parthians and the Sassanids, who often get called Persian. The point, if I have one, is that if you're still listening, this area is important, these people are important, and I can't wait to get started with you, so I'll do that right now. In reviewing the life and career of Nebuchadnezzar, it becomes apparent that he benefited from and built on the work of his father, Nabopolassar. Together, they engineered the rapid and spectacular rise of their city and empire. A rapid rise doesn't afford any polity the opportunity to build its infrastructure, literally or figuratively. Imagine a skyscraper rising before you could even build a foundation. But Babylonian domination didn't benefit from a slow accumulation of power and long-term stability. Had Nabopolassar and Nebuchadnezzar been succeeded in turn by competent rulers focused on building that foundation, or on shoring up the administrative capabilities of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, then perhaps they would have been okay. What the Neo-Babylonians really needed following the death of Nebuchadnezzar was a pragmatic successor of administrative talent, someone who could consolidate the political structure, build an administrative foundation, and take a long-term view of the kingdom. Unfortunately, that's not even slightly what they got. The great king's successors were focused on other things, for the allure of power and the unsurpassed wealth and luxury that fell to these successor kings proved too tempting. The empire had risen quickly, and following the death of Nebuchadnezzar, it got itself into trouble quickly too. Nebuchadnezzar's son and successor, Awul-Marduk, didn't make it 2 years before he was overthrown and murdered. This usurper, Neriglissar, tried to shoehorn his way into legitimacy by marrying one of Nebuchadnezzar's daughters. It did the trick, sort of, because he seems to have died of natural causes, but only after about 4 years on the throne. Can he kick it? Yes, he can. When he did kick it, he turned things over to his young son, Labashi-Marduk. But he was barely on the throne for 2 months before the friends and retainers of the deposed Awul-Marduk teamed up to usurp the usurper. Tossing aside the young king, whom they deemed to be illegitimate, the conspirators placed on the throne the much-respected nobleman Nabonidus as king. The person who was most shocked by this dramatic turn of events was Nabonidus, who was surprised by his sudden accession. He doesn't seem to have planned it or had any part in pulling it off. Rather, it was his son, Belshazzar, who had been the prime mover. Belshazzar seized the wealth of the deposed king, turned the throne over to his dad, and settled into his role as heir apparent to the throne of Babylon. For his part, Nabonidus was competent and conscientious. Despite the dubious motives and talents of his son, once on the throne, Nabonidus set up to bring some semblance of stability to the suddenly teetering empire. But the outlook was grim. Trouble popped up quickly, and while the various claimants to the throne had been solely focused on gaining power, serious challenges to the Neo-Babylonians were beginning to emerge. With this ominous note, we will leave Babylon here for a little bit, reeling, with several kings in rapid succession and a ruler of decided competence but highly questionable legitimacy sitting on the throne, trying to untangle one heck of a mess. At this point, we need to turn back to something foreshadowed in the last episode. The Medes. You may recall from our last episode that the Babylonian king Nabopolassar had teamed up with the Medes to crush the Assyrians, even marrying his son, Nebuchadnezzar, to the Median king's daughter, for whom the smitten Nebuchadnezzar had built the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. If you paid really close attention, you might remember that I said that the Median kingdom that emerged was about 3 times the size of the Babylonian one. So how come everyone has heard of the Babylonians, and almost no one has heard of the Medes? I'll bet you have heard of them, or, at least, the members of their priestly caste, the Magi. We 3 kings of Orient are, bearing gifts we traverse afar. Apologies for my singing. If you're still thinking you're not familiar with these people, that's okay. There's another reason the Medes and Medea don't ring a bell. They often get grouped together and bundled in with their more famous cousins, the Persians. But as we will see, the Medes and the Persians were not the same people. And the Medes were famous before the Persians, and that fame was not always for the best of reasons. The Medes are a bit mysterious. They were descended from the Aryans, a tribe about whom we have a little bit more to say in a few minutes. They seem to have originated in Central Asia, migrating to what is now modern-day Iran around the 1st millennium BCE. They brought with them their own culture, weapons, and religion, but it's not clear if they had their own written language, as no archaeologically recovered text has been found in the Median language. As such, and unlike some of their almost obsessively note-taking neighbors, we have no written records from the Medes, either about themselves or what they thought of other societies. Almost everything we know about them comes from other ancient sources, and those sources sometimes struggle to know the difference between the Medes and their neighbors, the Persians. Pastoral nomads, the Medes introduced sophisticated and deadly horse-borne bowmen. These soldiers, raised to ride and shoot from an early age, were a terror for their opponents. Able to combine the speed and power of a horse with the deadly accuracy of expert marksmen, the Medes could hit an enemy with force and quickly flee away, utterly obliterating any foot soldiers not prepared for the shock. But the arrival of the Medes didn't always mean warfare. Given their proficiency on horseback, they were a highly mobile people, ranging over large swathes of territory. As mentioned above, sometimes the Medes brought gifts, or more often, traded in them. And if you're thinking about gold, frankincense, and myrrh and wondering about the relative value of these precious commodities, incense in all of its form was an extremely valuable gift. The Medes knew the value of goods. Therefore, one important aspect of their entrance onto the stage is the trade network that they started to develop and facilitate. Previous cultures had certainly conducted their fair share of commerce, but the Medes pushed deeper to the east. Given the mobility of their horse-borne culture and their ability to crisscross east and west by riding from one side of their territory to the other, they made contact with the far distant people and made the ancient world just a little bit smaller. Warm it up, Medes. They're about to. It was the Medes that started the process of linking east and west that their successors would take to new heights. So when the Magi showed up with their gifts, you could bet it was going to be something super cool and exotic. The Magi, it would seem, had all sorts of neat tricks to awe and amaze, and they built a reputation for these great feats. It's from the Magi that we get magician. At first, the Medes were more loosely affiliated tribes than a unified nation. But then those horrifying Assyrians began raiding Median territory, and the country coalesced as a necessary response. Facing the onslaught of Assyrian violence, the Medes banded together, and in this defensive response to an external threat, the identity of the Medes morphed from a group of loosely affiliated, semi-nomadic horse people into a rising regional power under structured and centralized leadership. You may recall from our Nebuchadnezzar episodes that while the Assyrians committed unspeakable atrocities in conquering all who dared resist, it was the Medes who returned the favor. Engaged in their own life-or-death struggle with Assyria, the Medes sacked cities like Ashur, Nineveh, and Nimrud with their own horrific brand of brutality, so much so that even their own Neo-Babylonian allies were shocked by the horror of it all. There is an irony that the deadly foe of the Assyrians, who did so much to destroy the world's first superpower, did so only as a response to raids from Assyria in the first place. Maybe if the Assyrians had left the Medes alone, the Assyrians would still be around, swapping uproarious stories about the horrific torture and ritual humiliation of their enemies. You have no one to blame but yourself, Assyria. It was under this ominous shadow of the newly self-assured and decidedly Assyrian-esque Median Empire that the Persians began to enter the picture. The Medes and Persians shared some common ancestors, spoke similar languages, and lived side by side in the Iranian hills and valleys. But this close kinship didn't mean that they were equal. The Medes, as you will recall from our time with Nebuchadnezzar the Great, followed their obliteration of Assyria by building a massive and powerful empire atop the shattered remnants of the Assyrian one. The Medes were fierce warriors, and their methods of governance strayed into brutal oppression from time to time. Violence always breeds resentment. This is a historical truth, and the Medes had their fair share of grumbling subjects, both from within the Persian tribes and all the others that fell under the Median yoke. It wasn't just trade and tribute that swelled the Medes' coffers. Running an empire came with added bonus of administering some of the most powerful and wealthy cities of the Near East. But the Medes, for all their strength and power, never took to city life. When their great king, Cyaxares, took up residence in the cosmopolitan entrepot of Ecbatana, his followers stopped short of crossing through the city walls. Instead, they moved their camp outside the city, setting up their tents on broad plains stretching as far as the eye could see. The Medes, like many pastoral nomads, feared that city life would make them soft and weak. They reveled in camp life, feasting, singing, gambling, and oral storytelling. They hated the idea of being confined, unable to mount a horse, and ride over the horizon at a moment's notice. They stayed in tents, even as their king took up residence inside the city in a palace. If his retainers were concerned that Cyaxares would get complacent, they needn't have been. The Median king, who took over from his father when he was killed in the rebellion against Assyria, was of iron will. It was under Cyaxares that the horrific sackings of the Assyrian urban centers had taken place. It was his orders that resulted in the slaughter of every living being, that brought total warfare to every Assyrian man, woman, and child. In addition to being every bit as brutal as his vanquished Assyrian foe, Cyaxares was devious too. Just as Hammurabi had once done, Cyaxares once arranged for a peace conference with a hostile tribe. He threw a great feast, got everyone good and drunk, and slaughtered every last one of them. He was far from a lightweight, even if he came to prefer an urban palace to a tent in a damp field. Soft mattress, stone cold heart. If only he had Instagram, what a killer bio that would have been. But, as mentioned, the records on the Medes were scant. What we know is pieced together from the traditions and records of other people. So while we don't know with much certainty exactly where the Medes came from or how they organized their society, we do know that they were determined warriors, that they played a huge role in the downfall of Assyria, and that their brutal methods festered resentment within their victims, at least those that survived. In part because of the marriage alliance that wed the Median prince Amidus to the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar, the Medes kept the peace with Babylon, though. And there does not seem to be much conflict between the two great powers of the mid-6th century BCE. When trouble came for the Medes, it didn't come from a far-off foreign foe. It arose much closer to home. Like the Medes, the Persians have somewhat vague origins. Also, like the Medes, they were descended from the mysterious Aryan people, from whom the name Iran is derived. The Aryans were a great nomadic pastoralist people that migrated from what is today Russia and branched off into all sorts of areas in multiple waves of migration. East into Asia, southeast into the Indian subcontinent, west into Europe, and of course, the Near East. The origins of the Persians as a distinct cultural and political identity slowly evolved as these migrants coalesced into affiliated tribes, with each setting up shop in a different region. Where the Medes occupied what is today northern Iran, the Persians took to the south. This brought them into close contact with another great civilization of the Near East, the Elamites. The Elamites were an ancient people, occupying the north and east coast of the Persian Gulf. Unlike the Medes and the Persians, the Elamites had settled into city life early on. They were one of the first urbanized civilizations of the Bronze Age, with the origins of their culture dating back to around 3100 BCE. The cross-cultural contact between the two peoples influenced the Persians, who traded with the Elamites and got a taste of the refinements of urbanization and culture. The civilizing influences on the Elamites also accelerated the divergence between the rough-and-tumble Medes and the increasingly urbane Persians. The first entrance of the Persians into the historical record come from the compliments of the Assyrians, who were as fastidious in record-keeping as they were in annihilating their enemies. Always boastful of their supremacy over other kings, the Assyrian king, Shalmaneser III, ruled 859 to 824 BCE, crowed about 27 khans, i.e. tribal chiefs, of the Parawash paying him tribute. Parawash meant men from the land of Parsa. Parsa in turn came from Parqua, which means rib. This is a reference to the Zagros Mountains, the nearly 1,000-mile range in the middle of modern Iran, the place the early Persians settled, and a range that reminded people of a rib cage. Thus, in his inscription, Shalmaneser was bragging about the subservience of the Persians, and it's our first glimpse of them as a people united by a common identity. An inference that is worth emphasizing from the records of Shalmaneser is that rather than a unified kingdom under one ruler, the various tribes of the Parawash each had their own leader, their own Khan. Just as the Medes were originally decentralized, with a tribal structure loosely stitching people of a common culture together, so too was the case with the Persians. And just like the Medes, in time, one family would rise above all others to unite and lead all of the Persian clans to world domination. With this in mind, I will now give you a short and all too cursory overview of the mighty Achaemenid family. Around the 8th century BCE, Achaemenes, a semi-mythic figure of unproven historicity, was believed to have founded a new dynasty. He ruled the powerful Pasargadae tribe and established a hereditary dynasty. His son, Thespes, who seems to be real enough, conquered the Elamite city of Anshan and took to styling himself the Great King, King of Anshan, and used the city as a power base from which to advance the fortunes of the ascendant family. When Thespes died, he split his kingdom between his two sons. Cyrus I was king of the family power base of Anshan. The other son, Ariamnes, got the region of Parsa. Parsa? That sounds like Persia. The brothers got into and out of entanglements involving all the Near Eastern powers, including Assyria and Babylonia. They also got at each other's throats, too. In the aftermath of the collapse of Assyria, Khan Cyrus I was under the dominion of the new kingdom of the hill, Media. For now, though, we're going to follow the descendants of Cyrus, but the family of Ariamnes will loom large down the road, so keep that name nestled in the back of your mind. Cyrus I turned the kingdom over to his son, Cambyses I. By all accounts, Cambyses was a mild and reasonable man, but he was the Khan of the powerful Pasargadae tribe and scion of the ascendant Achaemenid ruling family, and that made him an eligible bachelor. He scored a prize when he married the daughter of the Median overlord, King Astyages, who we will get to know a bit more shortly. This was a crucial development for the Achaemenids, for by marrying into the Median royal family, Cambyses was elevated to the top of the Persian social structure above all the other khans. The marriage alliance of Cambyses completed the ascendant of the Achaemenids to the top of the social and political structure. This didn't necessarily mean that he had unilateral authority. The great Khan had to take care to manage the relationships with all the other powerful tribes and their leadership. This arrangement didn't make Cambyses their ruler, just their acknowledged social better, but he's clearly a leader a cut above the rest in terms of stature and authority. It seems as though during the reign of Cambyses, two important things happened. One is that despite the political intermarriage, relations between the Persians and the Medes deteriorated rapidly and war loomed. The second is that Cambyses elevated his son, Cyrus, yes, that Cyrus, to a military command. The cause of the conflict seems to be that the ever-expansionist Medes wanted more land and greater tax and tribute. Astyages, the king of the Medes, was reorganizing his kingdom from an affiliation of tribes into a top-down Assyrian-style autocracy with himself at the top. Marriage alliance notwithstanding, Astyages demanded Persian supplication. Persian resistance to this plan was not exactly well received by the Medes. For that matter, not all the Median nobility were thrilled with their forced supplication to Astyages. The Persian truculence stood in the way of Astyages' ambitions, and the Medes stepped up their efforts to strengthen their chokehold on their southern cousins. Cyrus began planning Persian resistance and preparing to stand up to their bullying cousins from the north. Cambyses died before the simmering conflict blew into full-fledged rebellion. In some accounts, he died from wounds suffered in a preliminary battle, fending off a Median raid. In others, he died an uneventful death before full hostilities commenced. Regardless, either way, he died, and he left the kingdom and a very serious problem of Median aggression to his son, Cyrus II. Things looked good for the mighty Medes. They had all the muscle, and the Persian throne was in the tenuous and untested hands of an unknown successor. Despite the ascendancy of the Achaemenid family, the project of consolidating all the Persian tribes into a united polity hadn't progressed very far. However, a common enemy can go a long way of facilitating cooperation between peoples or tribes. Thus it wasn't all gloom and doom for the Persians, and for the new Khan, Cyrus II, who, from here on out, I will drop the second and refer to solely as Cyrus. In preparing to stand up to the Median bullies, the Persians had shown a stiff backbone and gained a greater sense of their growing power. Cyrus was an effective and charismatic leader, and the various tribes had united under the leadership of the Achaemenids. Cyrus thus inherited a kingdom either at war or on the brink of it, a rising rebellion against a domineering overlord. Just as the Medes had stood up to the Assyrians, Cyrus organized the Persians to stand up to the Medes. It's worth restating that our friend Cyrus, who had impeccable royal bloodlines dating to the semi-mythic founding of the Achaemenid family, was also the grandson of the powerful Median king Astyages. Cyrus was born after his dad, Cambyses I, had married Astyages' daughter, Mandane. With that in mind, let's take a half step back and look at his early life. Except, we really can't. Very little is known of the birth and childhood of the young prince that would go on to become Cyrus the Great. There are no historical records of his birth or his childhood. We don't even have a reliable year for his birth. He was born sometime between 600 and 590 BCE. A bit more is known about the gender and raising traditions of the Persian and Median society, and we can get a sense for the rearing of Lil Cyrus. Adult Persian men and women lived highly segregated lives, with women raising and mentoring all the children, including the boys in their early years. Thus Cyrus grew up under the careful and loving supervision of his Median mother, Mandane, as well as all the other elite women of the Persian Pasargadae tribe. Even though she was queen, Mandane performed all the same chores and duties as the other women, including weaving, spinning fabric, baking, and cooking. Down the road, the mothers of the great kings would be exempted from such labors and take an exalted status above such physical labors. The women of the tribe shared more than chores. They communally nursed the children. As such, the boys grew up with strong bonds to their mothers and other women of the tribe, whom they elevated to a higher status than contemporary societies. Cyrus's mother, Mandane, as you recall, was Median. She raised Cyrus to speak not only his native Persian tongue, but also the Median dialect. Through his mother, he grew up understanding Median cultural values, which would serve him well when the conflict just discussed arose. His mother also taught him legends and hymns of her Median ancestors, cementing in the formative psyche of the young prince his ties to the land, the mountains, and the valleys held sacred by his ancestors. He was also acutely aware that he wasn't fully Persian. He was half Persian, half Median. Cyrus also raised to understand his place of primacy in any inheritance. Like many other ancient societies, Persian kings had multiple wives. Cambyses did, and he had other children from his other marriages. but by virtue of his mother's lineage. Only Cyrus was heir to both the Persian and Median thrones. He was raised to understand that he was special and that he had a birthright. Or perhaps, it might be better said, he had birthrights. At age 6, the Persian boys were separated from the women and thrust into the world of the men. Cyrus would have commenced a grueling physical, ethical, and martial training. He learned to shoot a bow, to ride a horse, and then to do both at the same time. Persian boys were also inculcated with the importance of telling the truth, a foundational value of mutual respect and integrity required of all Persians. Truth-telling was a core tenet of the Persians' Zoroastrianism, which demands that its adherents live by a commitment to good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. The chief god of Zoroastrianism, Ahura Mazda, or Wise Lord, brought people into the light through truth and required its adherents to reject the evil darkness of the lie. The origins of Zoroastrianism are a bit murky. The faith is built on the teachings of the prophet Zarathustra, who, apparently, dated all the way back to the period of the ancestral nomads from whom both the Persians and the Medians were descended. We've already met the priestly caste of the Zoroastrians, the Magi. It is an ancient religion, which, while having evolved over the millennia, is still practiced widely today, making it one of, if not the oldest continuously practiced religions in the world. Cyrus was raised to be deeply pious, a loyal devotee of Ahura Mazda. As time would tell, he showed benevolence and a keen sense of justice that marked him as unique for his time and place. As the heir to his father, Cyrus was introduced to the hardships of camp life and training in the strategy and tactics of warfare. His apprenticeship went from theoretical to real life and the conflict with the Medians, and Cyrus was about 21 years old when his father died. Well, or 31. Remember, there's about a 10-year span in the estimated birth year. I even have a source that says 41. It wasn't how old he was. It's what he did once he became king. In keeping with Persian custom, Cyrus, Mandain, and all the members of the tribe went into deep mourning upon the death of Cambyses. Out of respect for the primacy of the Pasargadae, so too did all the other Persian tribes. It was only after a mourning period of 5 months that Cyrus traveled to the ancestral homeland of his people and performed the rituals of succession to become king. And as mentioned, by the time he did mount the throne, Cyrus was thus at war with his grandfather, king of the terrifying Medes. It was not an enviable position, one that would take a leader of considerable skill and energy to work through. We're going to pause the story at this point. I feel a bit bad for Cyrus, as we're leaving him mourning the death of his father, newly crowned king, with all the Persian tribes counting on him for leadership, and staring down the prospect of obliteration at the hands of the mighty and terrifying Medians. Before our final sign-off, just to remind you of a favor, I'm so grateful you found the show and have given it a listen. Please follow or subscribe so new episodes find you right away. Please help share the word. Recommend it to friends who find it of interest. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I'm grateful that you did. Join me next time to see how the young King Cyrus faced down the dire challenges in front of him and subsequently came to build the largest and most cosmopolitan empire the world had ever seen.